Hi there, everybody. Well, today we're going to explore some of the ancient manuscripts and what they have to say about the esoteric secrets about your hand. Let's get right to it. All right, so one of the things we're going to be looking at is one of the oldest manuscripts on palmistry that we know of that still exists. This is a manuscript that was written in about 1160. That's when we think it was written. Academics have studied it. And there are actually four copies of this manuscript that still exist. It's called the Eadwine Psalter, or the Canterbury manuscript, and it is the earliest known manuscript on chiromancy or palmistry in the European traditions. And that's really significant and really interesting. As I said, it was written about 1160. This particular image that you can see in front of us here, that's from a copy of the manuscript that was done in about 1292. This one was in the Bodleian Library in Oxford. The original from 1160s in the Trinity College Library in Cambridge, and there's two more copies in the British Library. So there are four copies of this manuscript still extant, and that is this is something therefore is about 860 years old. So it's one of the oldest extant manuscripts on hand reading, and as you can see from this illustration, um, it's rather a crude drawing of the hand, but you can see that the lines are clearly present on the line on the palms of the hand, and you can see that there are inscriptions written all over the hand to tell you what all these secret things are. So, just a little bit of background about the manuscript first and that sort of period of time. So, we don't actually know very much about the origins of hand reading at all. In fact, this is the oldest manuscript in Latin, the oldest manuscript of any language from Europe, from the European traditions. And scholars who have analysed this particular text are quite clear that there is no antecedent to this text in other traditions. So there's no evidence of it's coming from anything in Greece or anything from Arabic cultures, which is kind of surprising because in the 11th century it was the Arabic influence that was giving rise to a lot of interest in science and mathematics and medicine within Europe. The influence of Arabic culture and Muslim culture throughout North Africa and into Spain, and the contact between the two cultures, between the Europeans and those in the Arab world, were basically kind of cross-fertilizing a lot of different kind of things. So Avicenna and Averroes were very important influences in that. And of course, it was the Arabs who had preserved all the texts from people like Aristotle and Plato. They'd been translated out of Greek into Arabic many, many centuries earlier, and they were preserved and then had to be retranslated back out of Arabic into Latin. But that didn't happen with the chiromancies. So while we know that medicine, physiognomy, and some astrology and mathematics came from Arabic influences, there seems to be no evidence that the chiromancy or palmistry came from those particular sources. So this is the earliest text that we know of. And so it's got all sorts of interesting things that we're going to look at today. And so you can think of this as the most authentic and original uh, chiromantic text. So this is the definitive text on the palmistry of the hand. So if we get that again and look at the actual images of that, one of the way that the text starts, it basically starts by looking at the main lines of the hand, and it basically says there are three main lines on the hand. And this is a really kind of peculiar thing about medieval palm reading is that they basically took the view that the three main lines were the natural line there, then the principal line which goes around there, and then what they call the herpatica, which in this case isn't particularly going in that direction. But those three lines were considered to be the main three lines in the hand, despite the fact that the hepatica or we like to call it the minor air line, that line is actually very rare and often is completely absent from people's hands. And it isn't the third most common line. The third most common line, of course, is this line here, the heart line or the water line, which, and in those days they called it the table line or the mensal line, for reasons which even they don't seem to know. But the three main lines were kind of considered to be important. And the significance of the three main lines, of course, was that they made a triangle. And but so looking for the first thing you want to look for in your hand is to see whether or not you have a triangle. Because a triangle in the hand is basically an indication of good fortune and that all things would be well. Basically, the the triangle was the sort of most important symbol within a Christian context because, of course, the triangle represents the Holy Trinity. So if there was a well-formed triangle in your hand, then that would show that you had the support of God on your life, and your life would be fulfilled, and your life would be you would be assured of a place in heaven at your death. And of course, it's these kind of questions that are really important for people at this time. How are you going to live? How are you going to die? Will you get promoted? Will you have an afterlife? Will there be prosperity? Will you have good fortune? Those sorts of questions are the main kind of preoccupations. And at that time, and that's of course that's what we find in the manuscript as well. And of course, the length of your life is a kind of the key question for them. But what's really interesting about this particular text is it's not the lifeline that's considered to be important. So the lifeline is the one that curls around the thumb here. That's not considered to be important. It's not the lifeline that shows the length of your life. No, it is the natural line, the line to, or the middle line, as they call it in this text, the one that runs across your hand. What in palmistry today is called the headline or the air line. And that's kind of really interesting. So this notion that the lifeline shows the length of your life is actually incorrect. The traditions in European palmistry say it's not the lifeline that shows the length of your life, not at all. It's the headline that shows the length of your life. And that's kind of interesting because if you think about it, um, whether or not you're going to have a long life will partly depend upon your ability to manage your life. And that depends, of course, on your ability to think things through, look through the options, look through the possibilities. And if you're a risk taker and you don't really think things through, clearly you're going to put yourself in more dangerous situations. And a long airline or a long headline clearly shows someone who thinks more carefully about things, more in detail about things, will go through things more thoroughly. So it's kind of an interesting correlation, but it's not the lifeline that shows the length of your life. It's actually the headline that shows the length of your life. So make sure you check out the length of your headline first and see if you're going to live a long time. And then the second, of course, is the quality of the life that you're going to have. And the argument is here is that basically the better and more well-formed your triangle is, the better your life is going to be. Um, Now, not all not the triangle isn't always well formed. You can see in this particular case here, there's a gap here, so the triangle isn't actually joined at that top right corner there. And that apparently, if that angle is empty, that shows. So if that angle is open, it shows theft. It shows you're vulnerable to having things stolen from you. So you really want to have your headline and your lifeline joined together, and so you have a closed triangle in your hand. And if your triangle is empty and clear, then that shows you're going to have an honorable death. And so that's kind of really important aspect of your life to know that you're going to have an honorable death. But if there is a crease that runs across the triangle, as you can see, there's been one drawn here, right there, like that, then this will show that you're going to die in battle. All right, so this is the second preoccupation. It's not this, first of all, how long are you going to live? But the second of all this, how are you going to die? And if this crease cuts the transverse line, then you're going to be death by water or death by fire, depending on where the line cuts. If it cuts down here, it's death by water. It's up there, it's death by fire. So crossing lines coming out and crossing the triangle or crossing the the headline will cause death by various different kinds of ways. So they're very preoccupied with death. Um, and the death by hanging, well, that's shown if you have a tight circle around the thumb like that. So check your thumbs. Maybe you've got a tight circular formation around your thumb, in which case that'll show you'll die by being hanged. And although they don't give it the detail of it, actually they also talk about being hanged by death from a lack of food as well. They don't tell us what the symbolism of that is, but there's also plenty of other things that we can look at to show us how we are going to suffer in this world. So the next thing they want us to look at is um, the the line of life, or the first natural line. If this line is red, then basically it shows there's going to be different pains in different parts of your body. So if it's red in the top section, it's going to be a pain in the head. If it's red in the neck section, it's pain in the neck. If it's in the neck section down again, that'll be pain in the heart. And if the last part of the line is ready, that'll be pain in the belly. So basically, have a look at your lifeline and see if it's red. If it's where it's red will show where you are going to be suffering pains. Um, so yeah, you really want to be clear that you don't have those kind of pain marks in your hand. And then the second thing about that, also in terms of where you're like susceptible to wounding and where you're susceptible to being injured, is of course to do with where those wounds will manifest if you are in a battle or in a fight. So let's just look at this other drawing over here. And you get these are more clearly shown in this particular drawing. So this is also from the same manuscript, and you can see all these little lines up here. So the little lines are here, all to do with wounds that you're going to get if you're in a battle or a fight. So the marking on the side of the hand up here, these are wounds that are caused that can be caused in fights that are wounds to your arms or your hands. Whereas these ones are wounds to your legs or feet. And if it's by the earth finger, then these are wounds to your body. And if it's over here, then it'd be wounds to your side. So you need to look at the little lines underneath the fingers, and that will tell you where you're going to get wounded if you enter into any of these fights and battles. What's interesting about that is there's another example of the modern traditions not understanding the same idea, having the same idea about these particular lines. Because of course, in modern palmistry, these are called the marriage lines. These ones over here, anything underneath there is to do with marriage and relationships. They don't see marriage and relationships in that part of the hand, and as it's quite clearly shown in this manuscript, that shows where you're going to be injured and where you're going to be harmed. Rather, marriage and fertility and so on is actually shown on the ball of the thumb. Now, please note they don't use any astrological nomenclature here. It's not called the Mount of Venus. These fingers are not called Jupiter and Saturn. There is absolutely no reference to astrology in this manuscript whatsoever. And secondly, they don't even talk about the mounts, and they are only concerned with the lineation to be found in different parts of the hand. So, in fact, they actually refer to these as hills. They kind of call the hill the parts of the raised part of the hand a kind of hill, and and so they look at the number of lineation on the hill down here to be the indication of the number of children. So that's the one there. So if you look at the lineation on here, you can see that that's got five little lines there. That's going to be the number of transverse creases you have there is the number of your kin. So when they're looking at this area of the hand, this is the second sort of big preoccupation. So the first preoccupation is death and injury. The second big preoccupation is matrimony, reproduction, and adultery or faithfulness as well. The line that kind of we call in modern palmistry the loyalty line, which tends to come down about there like that, on the hill of the thumb, they call this the pleasure of relationship line. If you have a strongly marked line coming down from the thumb onto that raised part of the ball of your thumb, it shows you're going to have a lot of pleasure in your relationships, which presumably means that you're going to have a strong sexual life. And of course, this is a big preoccupation for the people at this time. One of the things they're particularly concerned with, of course, is the virtue or the chastity of women. And there's a very easy way to know this. You look in the triangle. So you go back to your great triangle and you look for a sign that looks like this. If you see a sign like this, it's kind of like a little tail like that, with a kind of almost like a three going above it like that, with a little arrow coming out of it there. Okay, that's a sure sign that your girl is a virgin. So that's obviously you want to be married to a virgin. So you need to look for that particular formation. Um, in the hand, and it'll be there, right there, right in the middle of the triangle of the hand. Now, they also have indications for matrimony and adultery. Unfortunately, those markings aren't actually given in the manuscript, so those unfortunately are still very esoteric. Um, but um, if there's a different kind of circle going around the thumb, then what you've got in that case is another kind of faithfulness as well. So that faithfulness or unfaithfulness is shown by whether there's a complete circle or an incomplete circle around the thumb. Now, there are also some rather desperate things as well. They also talk about, so if you look over here, you can see the children lines or the kin lines again over here, like this, that part of the hand down there. However, they say if you see two strong vertical lines here, what this shows is you're going to have somebody who violates their mother's bed like that. Um, and if a formation like this appears, then what this indicates is somebody who will corrupt his mother or his sister. So basically, you're looking at signs of kind of sexual predation in the hand and violence towards women if you see those kind of formations in the hand. So there's a lot of danger. There's a lot of uh, problematic things that we can see in the hand here. So, for example, another one is if you see the letter E in the middle of the triangle here, or the letter, if you see this basically means this person will kill a man in battle or in a duel. So again, we're looking at things that will cause problems in life. Um, if there is a mark like a line like this, and it has little horizontal lines across it, this shows captivity. So this means you're going to be imprisoned in some kind of way. So and if there's a And if we're looking again in the hands of women, there are also indications of whether or not she is a prostitute. So the mark of a prostitute is a mark that looks like a G. Now they don't actually say where this would actually take place on the hand, but it's a kind of mark that looks like this. And let's put it on the Mount of Venus on the ball of the thumb, because that's where we might expect to see it there. So in the hand of a woman, that is the mark of a prostitute. But in the hand of a man, it shows this is somebody who will kill their father, or perhaps their brother, or perhaps their sister. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. That has to be said. It's not all doom and gloom. There are other indications of gradual happiness. There are good indications of travel and going on a journey. And particularly what's interesting is on the base of the index finger, that's where we find indications of promotion. So you can see on this particular diagram here, you can see a kind of letter C that's going around here underneath the index finger. Well, the C is one of the most prestigious markings to have. If you have a letter C on your hand, that basically shows you're going to get promoted. And in the context of this particular manuscript, since it was written in a monastery, it shows you're going to get promoted to become a bishop. So it shows you're going to have high standing and you're going to achieve. It's the same if you see a J. So if you see a J kind of formation like that, J kind of formation like that shows that you're going to be rise to become a king. So again, a position of authority and a position of status and a position of power. So yeah, ambitious people, you need to look out for uh, signs like that underneath your index finger. So this is all kind of obviously need relevant to the life of a monk in a monastery, and we can obviously translate those out now. So if you want to see if you're going to get promoted or have some particular power in authority within the worlds that you live in, you still need to look for the same markings on those on the fingers like that. It's because this is the preoccupations of the monks is, are they going to become prebends, or are they going to become bishops? Are they going to rise into that kind of particular role in the institutions in which they live? Now, there are other problematic things too. Let me just change the diagram back to the other illustration, going back to the uh, more crudely drawn one. The One of the interesting things to talk about travel, they talk about travel in terms of these lines here. So if you see lines coming across, cutting across the middle of the hand like this, these are indications of travel. These are indications of a kind of restlessness, desire. So they talk about restlessness or a change of location or going on a journey. But very specifically, if there was a Y formation underneath the index finger, and you can see it's been drawn here, a Y formation like that shows that you will die in a foreign country. So Yes. Um, it's not a good marking. You're going to travel, but in your travels, you're going to die as well. Um, yeah. So there's a lot of indications of death. There's a lot of indications of woundings. Two markings that will probably be of particular interest um, to men is if you have a point in the middle line, if you have little circles in the middle line like this. So circles in the middle line, well, that's going to show that you have experienced the loss of an eye. And of course, if there are two of them, that means you're going to lose both eyes. Now, that's really interesting because that particular um, marking has, you find that coming up again and again over the next 500 years. The idea of two circles showing that you're going to lose your eyes is an important preoccupation for people in this particular time, as is if you have the mark of two O's. And if you have islands on this line here, this basically shows you're going to lose your testicles. So if you have one line, one circle, you're going to lose one testicle. If you have two circles, you're going to lose two testicles. Um, Clearly not something that you're going to want to have. So look out for that, guys. That's not something that you particularly want to be able to see on your hand. So these are the kind of preoccupations of the 13th century, 12th century chiromancy. This is what they're interested in. This is what they're looking for in the hand. They're looking for signs and indications of death, the length of your life, of injury, of reproduction, of promotion and travel. And these are all original interpretations for these particular features of the hand. And what's interesting about it is that this is basically these findings stay consistent for the next 100 years or so, and so there's a kind of static quality to the handreading in the 12th century to the 13th century, and it's not until about 1440 that we start seeing a development of handreading. And it's not until the middle of the 15th century that we get the application of astrology to the hand. So it's really important to understand that in this early development of chiromancy. They were not interested in astrology. They didn't apply astrology to the hand. They didn't interpret anything astrologically. They were very much looking for signs and symbols, looking for the letters C and O, P and Q and G. And if you see letters like that in the hand, that would tell you something, as we've just uncovered in that kind of way. So the Eadwine Psalter is literally just a collection of about 60 markings that you can see in the hand and their significations. And we don't quite know where they get those ideas from. The evidence seems to be that it is an oral tradition that's been written down, but it is a curious fact that's been written down by a monk and is stored in this Psalter, this sort of psalm book and song book that was used in this monastery at that time. And the first written um, historic kind of mention of chiromancy does appear at almost exactly the same time. So there's a guy called John of Salisbury who wrote a book called Polycraticus, and it was published in 1859. So 1859, 1159, and he talks about Thomas Becket. And Thomas Becket was became later the Archbishop of Canterbury, but he was criticized by John of Salisbury for consulting with a chiromancer. Um, and that's the first European reference to the practice of chiromancy, that people actually were doing it and somebody would go to it. So it's a kind of curious fact that the first two mentions of chiromancy come from around the same time, uh, and center around the same place, i.e., Canterbury. And so it's quite likely there's a connection between Thomas Becket and this particular manuscript, the Eadwine Psalter, because it was written down in the same place that Becket became the Archbishop. So there's a kind of curiosity about that. That is the origin of handreading in Europe, in Britain, in the 12th century. All right, so now you know about the oldest Chiromantic manuscript in European languages in Latin from the 12th century. You know about the origins of that, of where that comes from, and you know about the contents of that. So if you want to find out more about that, you can actually look at that up on my History of Handreading website. That's at handreading.nz/history. And there's a great detail uh, about the manuscript and what it contains, and you can find that on my website there. And these are some other references. If you want to look me up elsewhere, you can find out more about my work, obviously on social media, Instagram and Facebook, and YouTube, and you're probably watching this on YouTube already. And if you're interested in seriously studying handreading, then come over to patreon.com and come and find out what I'm doing there. That's where I do my teaching on Patreon. And if you want to find out the format, the frame about which we're doing this teaching work about handreading, then go to handreadinginternational.com. So it's a collective of very experienced hand readers who come together to promote the serious study of the hand, free from all this fortune telling and prediction stuff. If you want to do fortune telling and prediction, basically, then you need to look at these kind of ancient manuscripts. And it doesn't take very long before you realize that they're basically kind of a superstitious collection of unverifiable assertions. And it's actually not really what handreading is all about. But if you really want the esoteric knowledge, if you really are a palmist, then it really is important for you to study these old manuscripts. So I'm going to be doing a couple of series of these videos on these old manuscripts, and then you can find out for yourself what the esoteric secrets of the ancient masters of palmistry were. And so if you like this video, like and subscribe, and there'll be more coming your way very soon. All right, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it.